A nuclear disaster at the San Onofre nuclear waste dump is unavoidable. That's according to an Orange County geologist and San Juan Capistrano mayor. Both met with the San Diego County Board of Supervisors earlier today about the issue. In October of 2015, a permit was issued to allow Southern California Edison to move millions of pounds of spent fuel into dry storage casks that would be buried at the San Onofre beach.
Here now to talk more about this topic is Charles Langley, the Executive Director of Public Watchdogs, and Orange County geologist Robert Pope. Thanks for being here tonight.
Our pleasure.
All right, so the San Onofre nuclear power plant closed in 2013. And in about 90 days, more than 3 million pounds of radioactive waste is set to be buried nearby.
That is correct.
And that is a big problem for you.
Yeah, that is a big problem for me because being Southern California, we're very vulnerable to earthquake risk. There's other geologic hazards as well. As time goes on, we're discovering that there's more risk of tsunami. And with global warming, we've got rising waters too. And this is being buried just 36 yards from the beach, just a few feet above the existing groundwater table.
Charles, give us an idea. How dangerous is this for people living in the vicinity from the standpoint of a widespread area? How far out could the reach possibly happen if there were a disaster at San Onofre?
Well, in a worst-case scenario, it could have the equivalent of 75 hydrogen bombs going off. This is remember, nuclear power plants were essentially made to create the material necessary for making nuclear warheads. So it's a potential for an incredible dirty bomb, which is why we want to get this stuff away from the beach and away from the ocean as quickly as possible. 8.5 million people live within the 50-mile plume zone identified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
And one possibility is Yucca Mountain in the Nevada desert, which I understand is that back on the table as a possibility?
It's a bit of a wild card. It got killed by Harry Reid several years ago, and some people say, getting it back open would require 300 years of litigation in federal court. But we have a new president who is very pro-nuclear and pro-nuclear power. The way the law is structured in California, you can't build a nuclear power plant until you figure out what to do with the waste.
So, Robert, what's the next step? What's it going to take to stop the burial at the San Onofre site, put it on hold until we can see if the Yucca Flats is a possibility or some other area that is far away from the population?
Yeah, I think what it's going to take is people getting up in arms about it and going and talking to their representatives and saying, we don't want this threat in our backyard. I believe that transportation of these materials to an interim storage facility that doesn't have the earthquake risk that we have at San Onofre and is farther away from sensitive receptors like the beach, like the major railroad, like Interstate 5, which are all within a couple hundred yards of the burial site, that would be a proper interim solution until we get a permanent solution.
Life is filled with risks. The utility argues that this is not a case of no risk, but it is low risk.
No. Well, from their perspective, from a business perspective, it's low risk for Edison, but it's high risk for the people of Southern California.
If I might add, you cannot buy insurance for a nuclear disaster. The federal government limits damages to $12 million. If every home, within a 10 or 15-mile radius was damaged by nuclear fallout, the amount of money available would be about $1,600 per homeowner from the $12 billion in reserve money. So it's not safe.
Charles, help me understand something. As highly regulated as California is when it comes to environmental laws, how in the world did something like this come to happen? The possibility of burying nuclear waste on a pristine beach?
Well, it happened in 1968 when we were in love with the atom and we all believed we were going to be flying around in George Jetson cars. The EPA had barely been invented yet. And this is a federal regulatory problem, and the feds say this is our issue. It's within the purview of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Local governments have no say in public safety in their own states. And they've literally mandated that now emergency response is to be handled locally. They believe this is so safe that any emergency response can be handled locally, and if one of these casks does get dropped or blows up, FEMA is out of the picture. They're not even allowed to respond.
So what is the next step here?
The most important thing we can do is prevent the internment of this waste, because once the waste is buried on the beach, it attains the legal status known as bona vacantia, which means an ownerless property for whom no one is responsible. When that happens, Southern California Edison, who currently owns and controls the waste, is no longer responsible for it. Right now, we have a multi-billion-dollar corporation that can be our partner in finding a nuclear waste solution, but once it's buried, it's no longer their problem, and we lose an important stakeholder, and it just becomes public property. It's not fair. It's deadly for 10,000 generations.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for being with us. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the new administration will help California move some of this waste to a safe place.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.